Mr. Lee's mission was to prevent the 1960s from entering Sacramento County. If it was contemporary, if it had to do with youth culture, especially anything even vaguely associated with drugs, he wanted it out. And so groups like the Hells Angels, motorcycle gangs, which were clearly very associated with drug culture in the 1960s, were absolutely anathema to him. This was a group that he didn't want in Sacramento at all.
This morning, a nation in turmoil.
Protests in St. Paul, Minnesota turned violent Saturday night.
Seeing the reports in recent years out of places like Minnesota and Ferguson, it's hard to believe we've made any progress in the arena of police-community relations since the days of Martin Luther King Jr. or the massacre at Kent State.
And we want change.
As the Department of Justice begins cracking down on law enforcement agencies who've used excessive force in civil rights violations as means of crime prevention, I began digging into Sacramento's history to find out whether or not our own police culture has evolved. And it led me to a strange and feverish feud between a local sheriff and an outlaw motorcycle club.
John Mr. Lee originally came to California in the 1930s. He was hoping to join the Olympic team as a competitive pistol shooter. He didn't qualify for the team, and he ended up in law enforcement. He definitely had an old school mentality, and this is a guy who was a competitive pistol shooter. He brought that pistol packing mentality with him.
Shortly after Mr. Lee was appointed sheriff in 1961, he aimed his sights on the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, which first made headlines in the Sacramento Bee in 1956, when 12 of its members were arrested at a house party in the Ben Ali neighborhood north of the city.
The biggest nemesis to law and order at that time was the Hells Angels. There were no Crips, no Bloods, no other inter-city ethnic-based, narcotics trafficking-based gangs that exist today. There was absolutely no equivocation in terms of his animus toward and control of the Hells Angels.
Mr. Lee wasn't the only lawman in California who loathed the Angels. The club had been making, as gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson put it, 100-carat headlines across the state since the 1950s. And by 1965, then California Attorney General Thomas C. Lynch had completed an investigation into the club and released a 15-page report describing their, quote, hoodlum activities.
You would never have a suburban housewife and mother step out publicly and assert, how dare the sheriff's department arrest these Hells Angels? How dare they pick on these Hells Angels? How dare they profile people who fly colors when they ride their motorcycles and wreak havoc on the community?
To get a better sense of just how tense things were getting between Mr. Lee and the club, I spent the afternoon with the widow of the founder of the North Sacramento Hells Angels. She allowed me to record our conversation.
Well, there was a lot of pressure. Whenever they want to ride, he'd have the cops following them around and pulling them over for, just like now, for any reason.
Tactics that he used against groups like the Hells Angels, were they legal?
Well, I think there'd be questions of it. Certainly, again, for somebody to fly the colors of their organization, I would certainly see as an absolute exercise of their First Amendment rights. So no, I think that would be an infringement on a constitutional right that would be unlawful.
Mr. Lee's persecution of the club seemed to reach a fever pitch in July 1964, when a group of Hells Angels showed up at a Sacramento City Council meeting and protested the alleged harassment. The city manager was requested to investigate the club's claim and submit a report at the following meeting. I requested a copy of that report, but was told it had been destroyed.
The legend is that as Hells Angels would ride their motorcycles on freeways or surface streets into the county of Sacramento, they would actually pull over and stop, dismount their motorcycles, remove their vests that flew their colors, the Hells Angels insignia, because the word was out, you do not fly Hells Angels colors in the county of Sacramento.
In May 1965, not long after the Attorney General's report was released, Mr. Lee announced that the Sacramento Hells Angels chapter had disbanded. Mother Miles had had enough and moved the chapter to Richmond.
There was no way they could ride in Sacramento with the HA patch on and have any kind of peace and not be harassed all the time. So he moved.
Yeah.
He just took it club and moved. Most of the guys went with him.
Less than a year after the club's move to the Bay Area, Mother Miles was killed while riding his Harley through Berkeley. A truck had pulled out of a side street and hit him head-on. When the funeral arrangements in Sacramento were made, those that had managed to wriggle out from under Mr. Lee's thumb decided to return to show their support. The outlaw caravan would form at Barger's house at 11 on Thursday morning. The Angels have gone to plenty of funerals for their own people, but until this one, they had never tried to run the procession for 90 miles along a major highway. There was also a chance that the Sacramento police would try to keep them out of town. But the word was out. Mr. Lee, in a surprise move, agreed to allow the Angels to ride into the city under police escort, attend the funeral, and bury their own. After that, they'd have to split.
That kind of special dispensation, I think, for someone in an authoritarian position, as he largely was, kind of appealed to him, and that letting the motorcycle gang come back in for one day was just that sort of thing. They were under a flag of truce. It was for a particular purpose. They probably would have put up a fight if he hadn't, a fight that it would have ended up being a conflict and a problem he would have had to deal with. So the easier route was just to make this benevolent offer and let the motorcycle gang ride in.
The procession rolled at exactly 11, 150 bikes and about 20 cars. A few miles north of Oakland, at the Carquinez Bridge, the outlaws picked up a police escort assigned to keep them under control.
It was extraordinary. But it was going to be a big bunch, so escorting is also a way of controlling and keeping an eye on it.
Now again, we're seeing similar social forces trying to stop 21st century social movements, as far as, again, LGBT rights, women's rights, transgender rights, as well as just fundamental civil rights that we thought had already been protected sufficiently.
Can we include the Hells Angels in that whole counterculture movement, or are they something different because of their disposition as an outlaw or a criminal gang?
That's a tough question, and the thing is, even criminals have rights. They have the right to jury trial. They have the right to, essentially, you're innocent until proven guilty. You shouldn't assume because a person is riding a motorcycle that they're automatically a criminal.